All right.
Right. Okay.
You let me
Yep.
know. You ready to record?
Yep. Okay. I'm good. I'm recording now.
All right. Hold up. All right. I'm ready to.
Right. Okay.
Here we go.
So
I'm live, bro.
hmm, um, as a sort of an intro for this, what we're doing now is something that not too many people have an interest in. Uh, Delving so deep into esoteric subject matter, asking questions that most people just don't have an interest in. They just get on with their lives. They're happy with the human being or not, but they don't question what the human being is or whether there's a God, what our purpose is in the cosmos, if anything, what is consciousness, what is love, are we real, and all these different sorts of things. But we do, and so that's what we're going to be doing here. And we've both got questions that we want to run by the other, because there's not too many people that we can have these conversations with. And so when we meet somebody that can actually think about and answer or shed some light on the questions that we pose, it's a very refreshing thing. And that I've cried out for years on my channel to get people to come forward to have this level of conversation, and very, very few people do for whatever reasons. And so, um, I've got a whole string of questions. Uh, a 10, off the top of my head. And so you've read my book, and I've covered all of these subjects in my book. And so I'm looking now to see what your perspective is and what you thought of my perspective. And so, first question: why hasn't consciousness as yet been discovered? And the reason why I ask this is a millionfold. But when we've got the best scientists on the planet, they are working with the Large Hadron Collider, smashing particles together to discover the nature of the universe and try to find the Higgs boson, which they have, by the way, the God particle. It was colloquially coined, trying to find God in the quantum particles, and yet they completely um, omit to even address what their own consciousness is. And so, my question I would love to pose to these physicists that work at CERN is, why don't you concentrate on finding what consciousness is before you start looking at the God particle with trillion-dollar large hadron colliders? Because it might just be that the thing that you're looking for God with is God.
Right. So you want to know what the why consciousness has not been discovered by scientists, right?
Yeah, and then what you think consciousness is.
So here's the thing. I look at consciousness as I had a very scary experience. You get what I'm saying? Where the moment I became conscious, I felt like it wasn't me that was conscious. It was like foreign because I felt like I wasn't even there at the moment.
Right.
So in my way of explaining this is, if you when you say how can like, not you, but I mean in general, why how consciousness has not been discovered yet, it's more or less like, are you aware of who and what is conscious? You get what I'm
Mm.
saying? Uh like I look at life, right? Somebody would say, is there any life in that individual, right? But life is a force that flows to and through you, but it just depends on your mental state. But you ever hear somebody say, man, I just did that and I didn't know I had that in me? You get what I'm
Yeah.
saying? You're not aware or consciously aware of that version of yourself, or the fact that you're even really there. Like, I'm conscious that I'm here in a vessel as a human. I'm being human right now. But that moment, that point where you something else wakes up within you, it becomes kind of scary because you feel like you lost control, yet you're still conscious of something happening. You get what I'm saying? It's kind of like when we were talking about, that whole psychedelic trip. It's hard to kind of grasp into how you can perceive what actual consciousness is. So, like when somebody says they're trying to look for the God particle through science and whatnot, and I remember in one of the videos you said, well, look at how they're looking through it. They're using science as a vice to get them there. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there's many different ways to look at it, because it's kind of like hard now uh, to kind of like unsee it, because somebody would say, um, let's say, for example, you had a psychedelic trip and all of a sudden now you say, oh, I've got attachments now, these, negative entities attached. It's not that they were never really ever there. You're looking at aspects of yourself that you weren't aware of, but the fact that you took a peek into it, it's not that they're attached to you. The way I'm looking at it is that you're aware of them now. You know what I'm saying? And when that fearful part is you not being able to look at them as something that's part of you, and you can integrate it to have an awareness of you that's another version of you. I hope I'm making sense with it, because this is kind of like how I experienced a lot of how I've been looking at life in general. The life is neutral. Everything in nature, everything outside of me is neutral. I give the meaning of if something's evil, if something's good, if something's a positive or negative. It's just me. What vibratory state am I in that's going to give me the experience for life to express itself to and through me, as far as me saying I'm consciously aware of something now? I hope that made
Yeah.
sense with that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Hmm.
It's kind of like life is a blank canvas until
Hmm.
we give it color. And so
Hmm.
I think that the question that I asked was in the wrong structure.
Uh-huh.
Instead of why haven't we discovered consciousness, it's the case of what actually is conscious, because we know we have consciousness, and we know we have varying levels and
Right.
degrees of it. And then when we take psychedelics, or we have an out of body experience, a near death experience, or many, many myriad of experiences, we have that additional facet to our consciousness, which then enables us to see broader and broader and broader. And then, you see, this is the whole thing about spiritually waking up. We wake up to spirits. We wake up to realize we are spirit. It is spirit. Everything is spirit. And there's a whole multitude of spirits partaking in each and every individual human experience. And this is why spirits, when we drink alcohol, they're called spirits, because they bring out a different variety of personality, which is a spirit, which you wouldn't know was there unless you drank that stuff,
Yeah.
to lesser or more degree. And so when we look at what we are, consciousness, um, a missed consciousness, and we're all perceiving and reflecting back our perceptions to everybody else, and we have an individual experience. We create our own world. There's no one world here that everybody experiences. We all experience it very, very differently. On some occasions, sometimes, not that different. But you'll find that if you go walking with somebody in a park and you ask them what they are seeing and what they're feeling, you wouldn't even know that they're there with you, because they're thinking about something at work, or 10 years ago, or arguing with the girlfriend, the boyfriend, or this, that, and the other. They're not even in the vicinity. How many people are actually present and focused and absorbing everything that's going on around? For instance, I would be walking with friends and I would say, "Where's your consciousness now?" And they go, just talking to you. Well, is there any other facets of your consciousness? I mean, if you ask me, where's my consciousness? I'll say, well, it's in my whole body. I feel my weight on the ground. I feel the earth beneath my feet. I feel the cool chill against my face. I feel the moderate sun, on my cheeks, and it's a little bit, glaring. I hear the birds. I hear the rustling of the trees, and I feel the dampness, and my consciousness is everywhere. But most people's consciousness is so myopic and narrow and they are never present. Even if they're sitting in the car with you and you're going to the same place to do the same thing, they wouldn't have the same journey. And
Mhm.
so, what do you think about that?
Well, here's a question I want to ask before we jump into that because it'll kind of tie into what you're saying. So where, like, I'm only using these terms because this is just what we've been given, for us to use for conversation. What is, if we say what is consciousness? Where did the term Christ consciousness come from, and how would that differ from us saying we're consciously different than someone else?
Well, I think the Christ consciousness is similar in lots of esoteric language. It's kind of like when you get the Christ consciousness rising, then
Mm-hmm.
it's the Christos which rises up the spine and blows out your pineal gland, and then you become enlightened once you've got the Christos within you. Well, a similar sort of thing is enlightenment in Buddhism. If we take earth moving psychedelics, then we'll have a similar sort of thing. It's when we have a great realization that we are, in actual fact, God, or at least a facet of God, and we're not this human being. The Christ consciousness is the consciousness which enables us to see vastly further than our myopic ego would be able to see. When we have Christ consciousness, we barely have an ego because everything's love and it's all beautiful and you see and feel the bigger picture. Whereas being a human being, it's all about seeing the small picture, keeping us small, because that's the only way we can experience being a human being. Because once we become enlightened, once the Christos or the Kundalini has risen, then all sorts of existential problems arise because this world is just Maya. We see it as complete and utter Maya, and that's where I am now, having had 300 psychedelic experiences and out-of-body
Mm-hmm.
experiences and deep meditative experiences and then supernatural experiences. All of a sudden now, or say all of a sudden, from when I started this journey 14 years ago, I am not that person. I don't even remember who that person was. I've got a faint memory of somebody, called Aaron years and years ago. But I'm just so far out there these days. And I don't believe anything is real, no more than you'd believe your dreams were real when you woke up from a dream. You see, the whole thing about spiritually waking up is when we wake up to being a spirit, God consciousness, and this is all Maya.
Well, how do you think that all these experiences you've had, let's say, and the things you've done as far as all the advancements you've made? I remember I've watched a few videos of yours where you put the knowledge you have, you know, you're basically above everyone else's regular, level of knowledge. You put yourself very high up above the average human. How do you think this benefits the planet overall?
How do
Is
I?
it for self-serving reasons, or do you think that there's also benefits to the collective outside of
Oh, so when people think like I do,
you? Hmm.
okay, what's some sort of level of awakening or enlightenment?
But what's the purpose of you being enlightened? Like, how would that benefit anybody else, or is it just for somebody to reach that state? What would be the benefits of it? Is it for self reasons, like for you to ascend, or is it for? Does it affect the collective?
Well, yes, it can only be in relation to the collective because
Hmm.
there isn't anything individual. We are not individual. We're all one. Everything's all one. And
Hmm.
so I was just reading a few excerpts what philosophers thought about Plato's allegory of the cave. Don't know whether you're familiar with that.
Yeah, Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, okay. So when Plato was speaking about his allegory of the cave, he was basically saying that people are asleep and that they're very very reluctant to wake up. Once you wake up, once you go out of the darkness of the cave into the outside world, and you come back in and try to shake everybody in the cave and tell them that there's a world outside and it's bright and it's brilliant, that they'll stone you and hate you and all this sort of thing. Very, very difficult to reach them. But Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, these sort of people, that there was, assuming that, well, once the light comes on in our consciousness, then we have to do whatever we can to share that, to enable others to awaken. And the whole philosophy in Buddhism that nobody will ascend forever until everybody is awoken.
Right. And how would you view the cave? The cave as far as to how we would explain that allegory to something logical and tangible for somebody to say this is what's happening here now in this reality.
Well, I mean, the difficulty is if you try to explain this sort of stuff to people in the cave, they don't know what you're speaking about. The only people that know what you're speaking about when you speak about those allegories are the people outside the cave. People who have been outside. And this is why I'm always speaking about concentric circles of consciousness. And many of my viewers, they watch my videos and they are vastly in the interior of the concentric circles when I am, scores of circles outside, and I'm talking about all these things which I've had a lifetime, 60 years to experience. And so if somebody 20 or 30 years old, watches my videos, it stands to reason that they're not going to have the experience to be able to grasp where I'm coming from. It's like when I started to read Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and all these great philosophers, it took me about minimum of 5 years before little bits started to come together, and I started then being able to reference this one against that one and this one, and I was referencing religion against philosophy and ideology and all these sort of things. Now with the scope of experience and knowledge that I've acquired, then I've brought things together. And it takes a lifetime to do this. And when we look at philosophers, they all had beards like mine, only they were much wiser because their beard was much grayer. So they probably had 10, years on me now.
I'm almost there, right?
All you got to do is spend about 5 years growing it, and then you'll be there. Yeah, so when we look at people who have, had earth shattering, awakening experiences and this sort of thing, most of these people, they're compelled to speak about it because that's the nature of the universe. You can't have a near-death experience and not make a video about it. I don't know what sort of a person has the capability to do that.
But do you think that's the ego that wants to like express it, like there's an urge to like let everyone know. Let's say you have an awakening and then all of a sudden you get so excited you want everybody to know about it. Is that the spirit, or is that the ego that's trying to express that to everybody outside of themselves?
Yeah, very.
And I'm gonna get into why I even asked you the question of like the cave and whatnot. But yeah, go ahead, answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, difficult to define, what the motive is, because we are both. We're spirit and we're ego. And for us to speak with any level of certainty, what motivates us, I would think that the vast majority of what motivates the human being is the ego. But what happened is, and I spoke about this in my book, when I reached about, I don't know, I suppose about 45, 50 years old or something like that. Before that point, I was massively driven by the ego, and I never contemplated the higher being or, spirit or anything. I was too embroiled in the wonderful things that the ego can bring. But then, when I had a massive traumatic experience which shook me to my core, it made me evaluate then what was valuable and important in my life, and all of that money and modicum of power and all the ego stuff, it meant nothing to me. And so this is why, consequently, I've sold everything and I've spent all the money, and I'm not interested in any of those things anymore. I'm interested in discovering more and more what the actual essence of what I am. What is
All right,
the
so
I?
yeah. So I'll give you my points of view, and then because I know you asked me, and then I asked you questions, and then maybe now we can tie in to see what we find grounds here on. So when I asked you about the cave, I look at the cave as the body. You know what I'm saying? The body's a temple. Like that one, I look at us individually like a blood cell. You get what I'm saying? But let's say, for example, one blood cell in the body gets lit up. There's a viral contagion type of way. If we want to use that term for to kind of put it into a mental picture to how it works. The same way one little pathogen can infect the whole body,
Yeah.
it could be looked at in the opposite way. Because I'm very big on the Hermetic principles, the law of polarities,
Yeah.
But when we look at it, where if, let's say, for example, I became enlightened, I don't really have to speak, more or less. Like somebody could just be very impactful just based on the presence of you being here on the planet. Because I look at that blood cell like we're individual blood cells, but we're still part of one whole entire body. So when I look at consciousness and then I say Christ consciousness, you would have to literally go beyond this human vessel. So the body can only house a certain amount of mental capacity or a certain amount of consciousness, let's say. But let's say over just coming out of that, the real you, the real essence, or let's say the essence of God, which is what we are, we're compartmentalized into, let's say, one blood cell in a body. Let's say if you got out of that space and you now became the totality of consciousness of that whole entire body. I feel like that's how you impact the entire body, the entire planet, or let's say the entire cave, without really having to use words. The words are very limiting. They're also very artificial to some extent. They're very man-made. It's hard to even put things into perspective using language, because people start to, they hear the word God, they hear consciousness, they hear Christ consciousness. It's just like it's all indoctrinations as to what they've heard throughout their life, that it's hard to kind of step outside that human level way of thinking. And you would have to actually come out of that human level way of thinking to even grasp what Christ consciousness is. Once you get a peak of that, it's hard to unsee it. Your life changes. You're kind of like, it becomes a lifestyle to some extent. Because I ask myself, what's the point of the shit that we're doing here? I don't believe, and all truth or none but half truths. That's why somebody who can say, oh, I know more than anybody else, or let's say I've kind of like grown above everybody else, there's still a limitation to that. And there's the law of opposites. You get what I'm saying? I'm not saying that what you said was wrong. It's actually right. But there's also the flip side of things and the different perspective of how to see it. You know what I'm saying? From my point of view and how I view life, the life force that flows to and through me is just dependent on the amount of active, let's say we hold a certain charge in our cells. How much life am I allowing to flow through me based
Yeah.
on the perspective that I have? If I'm closed-minded, narrow-minded, or let's say even if I think I'm just bigger than everybody else, I'm just limiting my consciousness to one blood cell, when I can just say I let go of that perspective I have and look at the overall, and I can see that I am the contradictory side of things and what I actually held a position on. So I am all things, and
Yeah.
that's why one who looks at the Hermetic principles, I mean, if somebody was to speak in that way, it would be hard to even say, well, what's your actual position then? You get what I'm saying? But you have to have a stance at the same time, because if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. There's so many different ways to look at things. You get what I'm saying? But overall, you are the totality of things. There is no wrong or right way to do it. It's just the way I look at it is how impactful you are. The person who speaks less sometimes is the one that can actually be more impactful on less words, only because it's more energy now and not this man-made human way of communicating. That's why once I believe we could build the pyramids a certain way, not using construction, but actually using our vessels in ways that we can't even fathom because we're just it atrophied. We stopped doing it. I can read your energy. I can feel you, even though you're on the other side of the screen. You get what I'm saying? I am having an energy exchange here at the same time. It's going beyond humanity. You get what I'm saying? What do you think of all that?
Yeah, I mean, the question that arises is that when we enter into that mindset where we know we're the body and not the cell, or we are the body and the cell, whereas most people consider themselves the cell and they don't ever see anything outside of the cell. When we have moments of knowing that we're the body and then we come back to be in the cell, it's kind of like, wow, that was incredible. We can't stay there. It's not possible for us to stay there as egoic human beings because our minds would fry. But when we do take psychedelics, we go there. And when we're there, we know that we are all that is, has been, and ever will be. We know that we are the cosmos. We feel as if we're the cosmos, and everything about our consciousness tells us, it screams to us that we are God. We are, and the second DMT trip I ever experienced told me that. Well, it's kind of like I knew that it was kind of like when I was there, it's kind of like, well, oh my God, it was such a revelation because I realized it's all been me forever and ever and ever. And there's nothing else. The vastness of consciousness, just dreaming this little egoic speck of Aaron Berry. And then when the DMT wore off, I was back in that little grain of sand on the beach of life again. And it's kind of like, what the fuck is this? What on earth's going on here? But so when we know that, that's when we come out of Plato's cave, and then we come running back into the cave, shaking everybody. No, 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 no! You don't get it. Stop watching those shadows on the wall. Come outside, come outside. And then people they won't come outside. They'll end up killing you. And so you.
But why do you think that happens?
Well, I mean, why? Yeah, that's a real good question. Why does that happen? Because
I think if anything, I think that's more of an example of you can't change others unless you change yourself. The moment you change yourself, everything around you changes, including the people in those caves. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to kind of like put it into words to other people when they're so deeply ingrained and indoctrinated into their, humanity. And I think that's something I've been really pondering on when it comes to consciousness. Like it just say Christ consciousness. That's why I always talked about this singularity or the unity, because Christ is the one or the way. I remember you referred me to the Tao, and something I came across is that when you think you got it or grasped it, that means you really now don't have it. You know what I'm saying? Have you came across something like that? And what does that actually mean?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, because with each concentric circle, I go out in, and the awareness becomes more and more expansive. It simply is a case of the more you realize, the more the little you know. It's a case of the more knowledge that you acquire, the minuscule you realize that knowledge is, because there's more and there's more and there's more and there's more, and it's terrifying. In actual fact, being a human being. And I made a video not too long ago, and I remember saying to my viewers, I said, look, what's happened to me in these past 14 years is that I've been on this path very, very intensely, and I've done nothing else, barely, with each waking hour. That's a massive amount of time. And there were times when I was in meditation and I would have these mantras that my consciousness is expanding, my perception and my insight and awareness is expanding, it's expanding, it's expanding. And I would say it's expanding by 10%. And I did that for several months. And then I said it again, another 10%. And then after, 6 months, I said, fuck it, I'll do it for 20% this time. And then all of a sudden, what happened is I realized that, oh my goodness, I think, be careful what you wish for because something's happened and now I can't communicate with the vast majority of people. And so it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for. Ignorance is bliss. And now I'm not quite sure whether I would, in actual fact, choose to go back to being ignorant again. Because now what this knowledge has done, it's put me so far out that now I can't even watch YouTube videos because they're so mundane, they're so elementary. And I'm like, oh, is this where people are? And I seem to have forgotten that I was there 14 years ago, 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Now I'm into reading stuff like Rudolf Steiner and, Madame Blavatsky and all this weird and wacky stuff, which people, would have considered, are bordering insane due to the level of knowledge that they have about the cosmos. And I'm not sure that's a good place to be.
So the way I look at consciousness too is it affects the whole pool. It's like if I'm in a pool of water with a bunch of people, my thoughts, or let's say my intellect to some extent, or like when we call it the intellect, it's out there for people to grab from like kind of from a branch if they're tall enough to grab it or if they're at the same frequency to grab it, right? But even somebody who I may perceive to be lesser than me may have something that I need from that space to strengthen my foundation. That's kind of like how I look at things, right? But the whole overall, as far as like, you said you wouldn't go back to being ignorant, right? Why would you not choose to go back to being ignorant, and why would you choose to stay at the level you're at with the amount of knowledge you've gained? What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you why I asked you that question.
Yeah, to go back, which of course is an impossibility. So therefore, it's going against the grain of the cosmic desire. It seems to me that that's what we're supposed to do here. We're supposed to grow spiritually, and if we believe in reincarnation, then we come back and we come back and we come back for this specific reason. And many people years ago started to tell me that I was an old soul, because from the very get-go when I was speaking from a place which was outside of my years, outside of my experience. It's like, and this is why, I've always maintained now that I'm channeling, because this stuff just comes to me. But what I've done is, when I've been reading all the philosophy and spiritualism and all this sort of stuff, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's it. But I kind of like already knew it. And, there's a saying that we know everything, because if you take a DMT trip, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter who, most people are going to be going, it was me, I'm everything, I'm God, because that's what it does to consciousness. It completely eradicates the ego. It just, turns it off and brings you to that which you really are. And when you listen to people who have had all these experiences, then, they all concur. It's all a very, very similar experience. We seem to enter the pool of consciousness from which we derived from. And so I just think I'm just living out what I'm supposed to do. And, it has been quite frustrating on lots of occasions. But the joy I've had from these spiritual experiences have been absolutely incredible. And I wouldn't
Yeah.
ever want not to have had any of those, you know? I think
Do you
basically
consider?
what I'm
Okay, okay, okay.
learning to do, Ziggy, I'm I've got to become comfortable with what I know now. Because I've been, screaming, you know, I remember years ago, I always used to be saying, do you not get it? Do you not, well, all I'm saying, look, what I'm saying is this and this and this and this and this. Don't you get it? Why can't you comment? And like, people would say to me, you don't realize how much you're saying, Aaron. And I'm like, well, I don't realize. No, I don't realize. You know, it just seems so elementary to me. And I'm almost at the point where I forgot, that I was very ego premised because it's been 14 years ago and I've traveled a massive, distance and journey since then. And the memory is becoming faint because I don't have any desire or anything that it necessitates to live in the past. I've completely thrown the past away. I don't see any of the friends I've ever had. I've moved on. If I was to see them today, we'd have absolutely nothing to talk about because
Mhm.
I'm not the person they knew, but they would be exactly the person that I knew. And that's the difference. And that's what's
Yeah.
shocking and so disappointing about it.
Mhm.
And that's why I can't go there. And so, I have a channel like this, to speak to the world, to put it out there in the world and see who wants to come forward. And, the conversations that I enjoy are people who are very, very intellectual. And those people are far and few between. And so, what do you do? What do you do?
Well, the only reason I ask this is because I mean, do you consider yourself a high energy person or a low energy person?
Oh, high energy. Yeah, very high energy.
And you prefer to be high energy, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I look at it like this: like when we talk about as within, so without, right? Uh, Energy, everything's energy, and it's just depending on what you value as far as that point of energy. I remember you just said just now in this conversation that you have no interest in even money. You gave
Yeah.
everything away. You know what I'm saying? You kind of like discarded everything from your life. That's a form of something that people would use to physically, expand their life, right? So like when we talk about life trying to express itself to and through you in the physical, that's a form of wealth that can basically get you to, let's say, travel to different places, let's say, just entertain the ego to some extent, but it's still energy. You know what I'm saying? That's why I asked you if you're high energy or low energy. Life always seeks to expand and express itself. That's the point to life. Unless you're going to degeneration, you notice that the end goal to something degenerating is basically death, even though that's an illusion where things are just continuing on. Just like there's everything intertwined. When a tree falls, there's life for other things in the forest because that tree died, or there's life in death as far as like those microorganisms eating whatever the physical matter has died because there's no longer holding a charge. But the whole expansion part, like let's say the money part, holding on to the money, I feel like it's fear driven. It's coming from an animalistic state that's inverted, and I would consider evil. Like we would hear this as the love of money is the root of all evil. But the love of money, it's the love of what I'm doing, but attracting that same energy in return. How would one gain energy from the universe, or let's say energy spiritually? Right? You're meditating. You're basically letting go of the ego at that state where you're shutting everything off. There's something else that's being charged and being put attention to. But let's say money. If I love money, and yes, I do seek to expand in that territory as much as possible. Not because I like toys. Like I just told you in my last video, in the last conversation we had, I bought 2 lift kits for my Jeep. I love my I'm doing it in the process right now, but that's something I enjoy. You get what I'm saying? I have money to buy certain things for my garden, whatever it may be. But let's say if the money becomes so burdensome where I have so much of it, I'm not afraid to give it away only because I know it's going to come back easily. And I've been in these positions where I've had so much at one point that I remember I was just giving it away. I used to tip really good. People used to love serving me in restaurants for that reason. I still am a good tipper, only because I was a bartender for a certain amount of years,
Mm.
and I know how it feels to be tipped. But giving the money away, I noticed brought it in more. You get what I'm saying? It just brought it in more. But the moment I changed my perspective on like, oh, I don't care about money anymore. It's like an energy. It's like it doesn't feel like coming back to me in that way. Only it's like a bitch. It's like a woman, bro. You don't appreciate the woman. It tends to like lose interest in you. So when it comes to energy, spirituality, life in general, I look at life overall. It's neutral, but it wants to express itself. And I notice that the more I expand as far as energy goes, the more energy I have to expand externally to the world in any kind of way. Look, you just said right now that you gained all this knowledge. Now you feel like making videos. That's a form of sharing what you consider wealth, because to you that knowledge is wealth, right? Because you said that you wouldn't go back. That's like a rich person getting rich and then saying, would you go back to being poor? No, I don't think anybody would do that, right? But there's different perceptions as to what one would consider wealth. You get what I'm saying? To some people, they live to just be healthy. So they live around, going in the mountains, breathing properly, or just eating the most healthiest meals. They dedicate their channels to just health. Oh, this is their diet. This is what they eat in a day. This is what they do. And then there's people, there's a market for that, because there's people who follow that. There's people who follow intellectuality. There's people who follow debate channels. So it just depends what you're into. What's your like niche? You know what I'm saying? But overall, just in general, humanity is kind of like something that when you look over it, you'll see that there's a different type of currency, there's a different type of wealth that basically puts all those things into balance when you're balanced in that perspective. Basically, the eye of God. You know what I'm saying? Like bringing the energy up, and then it's kind of like a tree. It's got all these different branches. I look at that as all different type of channels. The sun hits the tree, but it brings all that down through the trunk, down to the root system. Everything's working together. You get what I'm saying? So I don't demonize the money part. I don't demonize like everything just comes and flows to you. We're alive. And the key is to be magnetic, but also know how to what you're pushing out, right? That's the electrical part, the masculine part. So that's why I asked you that. So tell me what you think of that, because that's kind of like something I wanted to basically put in there just from what I heard from you about the knowledge part, what you would not go back to, what you considered something you wouldn't go back to because, you find it of a benefit to you, but how would it benefit others? But yeah, go ahead, bro.
Yeah, well, I mean, the going back to, let's say, some level of ignorance, I don't think that is beneficial. To go back to having money, I don't need money anymore. I don't want any of the things that money used to buy me. It used to buy me world travel. It used to buy me big cars and nice houses and girls and anything I wanted. I
Yeah.
always had whatever I wanted, and I'd have thousands and thousands in the bank. But what came with that? Well, a lot of bollocks came with that. A lot of trouble, a lot of hassle, and
Like what?
well, for
Like
instance,
what?
like being shot in Africa because I was deemed to be wealthy in a very poor arena, so it almost
Right.
brought my death. Then you attract people who come to you for the money and the prestige, and they're not real, they're not authentic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you have something to live up to, and so you buy the big car and the fancy car, and then it costs you, 5 or 10 times more than most average car because the prices for this car are stupid. And so you're just being a fool to yourself with lots of these instances. And since I've let everything go, then what you see, mostly what the money did for me in the early days was give me world travel. That part of it was absolutely superb. Every single second of it was wonderful. But now I'm satiated with world travel, and I no longer want to look at the macro aspect of the world. I'm looking at the micro, and I can do that in my own garden. I can spend forever looking at the micro out in my garden.
Can you give me an example of what the micro is?
The micro is just looking very, very carefully at how everything is. just how a thorn is formed on a rose stalk, how the petals are distributed, how the light looks different when you're holding it in different hues, and how leaves they grow, miraculously out of these
Oh
buds,
yeah,
and you see that they're like an embryo inside.
yeah,
Everything, the genius is in there, and then it goes, pow! Can you
yeah.
see what we are? And
Mhm.
it's like, fuck, that's a fucking miracle. How the fuck do you do that? I'm lost in that. I'm lost in it, man. And
Yeah.
so that's it. And I don't need money for that. And so uh, if I had money, that would just be a burden. And I'm even saying about my book now, I don't know whether I would enjoy a little bit of money if it came from the book, or what would I do with it? Oh, okay, maybe I would like to go and live down in the Algarve in my 10th floor apartment in the wintertime. I would like to do that. But as to anything else, I'll never drive again. I don't want a car. I don't want the burden of it. I'm just so happy having every single second of every day to me. And I
Mhm.
just stand, for an hour or two each day, just watching my squirrels, just
Mhm.
watching the squirrels,
Yeah.
watching the attitude of the birds and the characters, and I get to know all of them, and I can almost name them all now because I know what they're all about. And when I
Yeah.
speak about my squirrel to other people, they go, really? 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 They've got no idea.
Yeah.
I was never that ignorant. I always knew that squirrels are smart. I always knew that animals are very, very smart, smarter than most human beings. But when you tell, a so-called smart human being how smart squirrels are, they look at you in disbelief. It's kind of like, seeing that's believing it. It's kind of like, when I say my squirrel knows his name. And he comes, to me when I call his name when he can't even see me. He knows instantly who's his daddy. And then if I don't say anything, as soon as I walk in the garden, they know from the way I walk who it is. There's a
Yeah.
billion things just to get in tune to, and that's where I am.
You
I'm
know,
in.
I'm big on that because I actually I've got a couple of years already experience with praying mantises, bro. And I
Right.
feel like they recognized my face. They knew who exactly I was. Yeah, because I remember I actually I pulled about 30 of them in my house when they were born in the middle of December a couple of years back, and I fed them. I took care of them until like the springtime, and they got really big, like this. And
Right.
I let them loose out in the garden, and I could tell you, man, I can feel like every time I would be pruning my trees, they would look to the right and just see me, and I'm like, it's like they recognize who I was. I don't know why I felt that because I'm like, yo, you know who I am, you know who I am. It's the same praying mantises, and they lived in my garden the entire summer. Winter time came. Of course, I don't know whatever happened. They died off. I've got new praying mantises now that egg hatched in one of my rooms over here where I have the plants. But man, even to the smallest insects, I think there's like some form of intelligence that we take for granted, and we don't really ever realize it
Yeah.
until you're experiencing it. That's why I think it's powerful what you're doing. Where you spend all this time in nature, because I've got that experience where you're looking at the simplest things, all the simple. I have a seed, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe this little seed. I remember I grew a cannabis tree, and this little freaking seed, and it just bloomed into this huge cannabis, tree. And it's like I look at it, I'm like, I remember that shit was like it was like a, a freaking little shit, and it's like with
Yeah.
the technology in there for it to just the potential for it to just grow into something so big and produce so much bud. You get what I'm saying? It's like
Well,
amazing to me.
it is. Everything's just so remarkable. Now, I mentioned that I wrote a small bit about it in the book, and
Mhm.
what happens to me now is that when I don't have any pressing engagements in here,
Mhm.
my mind is completely free and expansive and open for the universe to speak with me. And so, walking through the woods, I noticed just everything about me, from yards and yards and yards away. Um, but for instance, like walking in the woods on a rainy day or just after it's been raining, and that hanging from each leaf or twig or bud, there are in your close proximity that you could actually see them. And if you had binoculars, right, you could see them and you could hone in and you could see your reflection in every
Yeah.
single one of these raindrops hanging from leaves or buds. Well,
Yeah.
that's the universe looking at you. And when you go, I take a magnifying glass out into the woods and I go up to beads of rain hanging from a leaf and I'm looking at it like this, like Sherlock Holmes, and I can see me with my magnifying glass in that bead of rain. And that blows my mind.
Hmm.
I once had this meditation whereby I was in this dome with like 1,000 eyes, and they're all looking at me. Every single eye was all looking at me. And I'm like, well, that's what the cosmos is like to me. And I speak about loneliness and boredom in the book, and I proclaim that I've never had any of those, except for about 30 minutes loneliness when I thought I was going to die on Mount Kilimanjaro. Other than that, and then the chemicals start to seep out of your brain and tranquilize you into a state ready for death. Very, very bizarre. And so that's how I'm spending my life now, and it has the greatest of meaning. And going out every single morning to feed my squirrel at dawn, then depending on how the weather is, depends on who's singing, who's talking. Whether the squirrels are talking, whether the birds are singing, what birds here, there, and everywhere. There's a whole world within world going on that people will never realize until they just let go of all that stuff. And
Right.
so,
So
sorry,
you don't think it's like that? You don't think it's like that with knowledge too at times? Like, you ever heard of people saying unlearn what you learn? And what is your opinion on that? Because I've noticed there's certain times where I've had to let go of what I know to make space for something else. You get what I'm saying? So, uh, in other words, let's say everything you know, it's kind of like emptying the cup out and then allowing new things in. Or do you think that everything you've gained up until now determines the experiences you're having moving forward? You get what I'm
yes,
saying?
yes.
So, like, let's say, for example, if you had a psychedelic trip, are all your psychedelic trips the same, or do they change every time you have a new trip, or every time you have a spiritual experience?
Yes, well, there's a certain theory about many worlds quantum theory. And what this theory basically is that every millisecond of our lives, when we do something, there's a part of us that splits off to another parallel dimension to live out that life. And so we're splitting into, gazillions and gazillions of parallel universes. Well, when philosophers and scientists look at that, they say, well, look, that's just a theory. And of course, we have to accept that it's feasible. Given what we know, it is feasible, but very, very outlandish and not cost effective. And so, but what we do know is that this happens on a smaller scale. Because, for instance, if you meet a girl, then your whole life is going to change in relation to the trajectory you go off with that girl. If you met another girl, she'd introduce different family circles and different hobbies and different knowledge to you, and another you would go off on that trajectory. And so, what I'm convinced of, every single thing I do, every book I read, every video I watch, it builds up a propensity of me becoming more in a certain way. Now, if I change trajectory quite drastically, i.e., sometimes I'm full on doing my videos and I become, somebody I don't particularly like because I get overly frustrated because nobody can communicate with me. And then I start demeaning them and going, for fuck's sake, you're just a load of fucking muppets. Is there anybody out there that's read a fucking book or anything? For fuck's sake, do you want to talk about that book? Come on, let's talk about that book then. Anything. But nothing ever makes manifest. And so I'll go, fuck it. And then I'll go back and I'll just be reading each day, and then I go off onto being a different me. I'm a calmer me. I'm a more insightful me. My knowledge expands. Instead of having the contained egoic facet of the awake and brave, I go into something else, and all of a sudden I feel my spirit expanding and going off on wonderful journeys again. But the ego keeps bringing me back. It's got this thing. The ego needs satiating. It's a powerful thing. And even though we become this spirit, once you wake up to spirit then is an adversary of ego. And there's a battle going on. And this is the dark night of the soul, because whilst we're going through the dark night of the soul, the ego is dying. Effectively, the ego is dying, it's diminishing. But because the ego is so powerful, it fights every last second of that scrap, until in the end, it just knows that it can't compete with such an awesome power of spirit. But it doesn't stop it, being quiet for some time and then coming back again, then trying. It's like an unpredictable wild animal. You never know. If you've got a wild animal and you take it out of the wild, and then because it's got a broken leg and you nurture it and you become its friend and it loves you, at the end of the day, it's still a wild animal. And you never know. And we've all heard stories about people who have brought lions and tigers up, this, that, and the other, and they spent 20 years with them until one day they get eaten, or the animal bites the skull. And this is tragic, and it's happened to many people that have been studying these animals. There's always that thing, and that thing is the ego. There's always going to be that. The ego will never die. The only time the ego dies is when the human being dies. So we have to contend with that.
Do you think this is all based on memory?
Well, if we didn't have memory, then we'd be basically like animals. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, you see, just to say animals, the animals, well, they're so broad, and elephants have the greatest of memories. Goldfish have the smallest of memories, apparently, and so it's difficult to say. But what I try to do is, and in the book I said, my past to me is like ghosts. Why would I want to keep company with ghosts? Because all they're ever going to do is keep, echoing a sound of something that I faintly remember, me saying or hearing or being, experiencing. I'm like, why do I want to carry that with me? I don't. So therefore, I rid myself of all the spectres, of all the ghosts, of all the memories. I'm not interested in it. And that's why I don't want to see any friends, because the only thing they're going to be able to speak about is the me 20 years ago, the last time I saw them. And I'm like, oh my God, have you got any idea the life I've lived in this 20 years? I don't know what to say about that. I think I'm writing this book, and if I ever do, I'll carry a copy with me everywhere I go. And if I ever meet an old friend and they say, do you want to come out for a drink? I'll say, read my book first before you.
You just made your own Bible, bro.
Because once you've read the book, you might not want to.
The reason I asked that is because you notice how as children they kind of train us to memorize everything. Memorize.
Yeah.
It kind of enhances that memory, and not the critical thinking or the enhancing what we already have within us, right? So I look at these animals, for example, like cats. Like I got many cats out here in the garden, and they're born with instinctual memory of what they're supposed to do, right? But they need the other kittens. Let's say when a kitten is like, a baby, they need to be around their mom a certain period of time because they're picking up, stuff that they're supposed to learn in nature from the mom. But it's not memorizing anything. They're just learning something from a piece of what they came out of. But now also when they have kittens, they kind of play with each other all the time, and what this does is it enhances the abilities that they were designed for, which is hunting and being ambush predators.
And to
So
be a
every
member
time,
of the social society. You
right,
see, the biggest issue that I've got with my squirrel is that it didn't have any squirrel parenting. It had a human being parenting. And so this is why now my squirrel is vastly more dependent on me than all the other squirrels. If I don't go out of a morning time to feed them, well, within an hour their bellies are full. But my squirrel isn't. He'll just hang around in the trees. He'll have a little bit
yeah.
of a nibble on this and that, but he's been conditioned into knowing that his belly's going to get filled from me.
Right. Well, and that also depends on the animal, in my opinion. They're not like squirrels aren't ambush predators. They're basically foragers. They basically learn to just collect shit. They got good memory to where they put it. You get what I'm
Yep.
saying? They know where they bury it. But a cat, for example, there's been times where I go to New York and I don't come back for a while, and I've seen they went to town on a few birds and mice
Oh
in
yeah,
the garden.
yeah.
So they will their animal instincts kick in when they're hungry, and they will actually start. Now you'll start to also see the alpha and beta instincts come out, where the alpha male now starts to bully the other ones out because they kind of like see things as like, oh, there's not enough for you. They want to house everything only because I'm not there. It's a little more common when their bellies are full, of course,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
basically I want to talk about that. Even how humanity has their bellies full to some extent, and they've lost that primitive
The eye of the
animal
tiger.
instinct. Yeah, the eye of the tiger, and you can even see that with boxers and whatnot when they lost that hunger, because they've been fed so now they became rich that hunger goes away, and they're not the same fighter they were when they were
That's
up climbing
the
the
classic
ranks.
Rocky 2, that is, isn't it?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And you can see that in MMA. I watch UFC, and Conor McGregor, for example, is somebody who was a completely different person than he is. Once he became a millionaire, his belly's full. Obviously, that hunger goes away. It's a completely different animal now.
Yeah,
But the reason I spoke about the memory part is that for example, children are taken out of the environment. A child is we're basically animals the same way. It's just that we're taken out of that environment, put into classrooms and trained a certain way to memorize things. But I feel like that disconnects us from what we have, what we're programmed or designed to do. So now we're
absolutely.
doing things that we're not supposed to do to basically and disconnected us from what we were designed to do. Which if you
Yes.
start to see what history tells us about how I don't believe in history. I don't believe anything even happened yesterday. To be honest with you, the thing that holds me to that is my memory. Is that something happened yesterday? But before that, they teach me what happened before I was born, but nothing ever really happened before I was born. No different than something never really happened just yesterday, yet I experienced it. That's why
Yeah,
it's good to let go. And that's a loving frequency. When you let go, love is a letting go process. And if it's meant to be, it comes back. You've heard that. But
yep.
when it's egoic, then it's conditional and you hold on. The ego likes to hold on to shit. Everything in life is supposed to flow and just move. It's just like your gut. If you eat food, the key is to get the nutrients, expel the waste. If not, you're constipated. That's never going to feel good. That also brings diseases on the body. But I look at these animals, and we are these animals in actuality. When I look at ants, I remember I saw you made a video on like how militant they are, and they the bees, how they have a queen and whatnot. We're doing this, but we're part of that same animal kingdom. It's just
Yep.
that we have these higher faculties, and now we're using it for power and control. And it's totally different. You got hornets that invade colonies of bees and whatnot. You see that in all actuality, but it kind of all that is basically an inverted way of looking at how our animalistic nature is unbalanced in how we act in society. um I'm big, and I want to get into what is the role of a man, or what is a man supposed to do. But you know how we talk about we got into consciousness, then we talked about life, right? Life is a force. I explained this. It flows through and to and through you. What is the purpose of death? Can you answer that? Like, what is the purpose of death? Since we talked about life, I want to know what the purpose of death is, and why did the Egyptians, like what we're told of in history class, that they focused all around death, right? And now we are taught to fear death to some extent, right? But why was it so emphasized at one point to basically prepare for death, and why there's so much energy even revolved around that particular topic at one point in time, and we kind of like got away from that? What do you think the purpose of death is?
Yeah, well, the purpose of death is the opposite side to the purpose of life, and they can't be one without the other. It's the whole yin and yang, and it's kind of like, well, it's like saying, what's the purpose of black? To create white. What's the purpose of cold? To create or distinguish, a difference in temperature, and so in this dimension, throughout the whole cosmos, as far as scientists have determined, there are polarities at play, and so there is no purpose over and above anything else to anything. It's all a circle of life, and so when we look even at Earth, apparently it turns inside out as the tectonic plates move under one another and go back round again and become molten again and then boil back up again, all these sort of things. And then the Earth itself is supposed to, try what it's like being upside down. It shifts its polarities every, so many thousands of years. And so as far as we're concerned, if there was no death, then there would be little joy, because we would have nothing to gauge it against. It's like now, at a 60-year-old man's perspective, I'm finding more joy in the more rudimentary things that I wouldn't have looked twice or bothered with as a younger man. And so you could say, what's the purpose of the rudimentary things? Well, to keep an old man busy and content, of course. What's the purpose of the macro and, all these wonderful things, mountains and shipwrecks and all that? Well, to invigorate young men. And so when we look at life, it's a journey, isn't it? And we can't have the journey to its full capacity unless we know that it's a journey that's going to end. Because if it's a journey that doesn't ever end, we can procrastinate about everything. We'd never feel the need to do anything. It's kind of like when we go through stages, we have decades, and then between 20 and 30.
I can hear you, okay?
Yep.
Keep talking.
We're at our strongest. And then we will probably be wise to start a business or, follow our dreams, because we've got the greatest level of energy to do that. If we leave it till too late, 40, 50, the energy and the desire fails us, and then we'll never make those achievements. And so there's a time and a place for everything. And like the song says, there's a time to live and there's a time to die. And so I don't believe there's a purpose in anything per se. I just think it's consciousness having an experience and just seeing what happens. I think that's actually what's going on.
All right. I mean, the reason I asked you that is because when we talk, we talked about memory, okay? And memory, I mean, we just basically bound on memory, and that's how I feel like we determine what's happening tomorrow is just programs. Those programs are bound on memory. Now, the reason I ask about what the purpose of death is, right? When we look at death, we only put purpose to life, but only the things that matter to you start materializing in your reality by your attention and your focus, which makes it a sacred thing to you, particularly. Now, in my opinion, and tell me what you basically have, on this, is basically they were preparing for death because they were preparing for what comes after, as far as like what they're creating. So when you look at the word memory, I broke those two words down. This one guy, I heard it from Zen Atman, and I looked it up, and the prefix mem and ori means water and light. Now, your body is made of water, and you're basically a light being to begin with. But the reality that you're in, the earth you look at, is not real. Nothing outside is real. Yet we're having an experience that's very real. But the world is basically a mirror of what you are. If you look at it, it's made of water, and the land body is probably like 30%, just like the body is made of 30% matter, and then the rest is water. So when you have a death process. That's a detachment or a letting go process. And this is how I looked at, the Egyptians preparing for what happens next. Is they're preparing to let go of the body and basically creating another world. So, like, let's say if you leave this life, let's say you're leaving the planet, the end of the world is gone. You leave your body, you leave the world behind, right? The body stays with the planet, but I look at it as what has been created in that space for you to make space for what comes after. Because here it's all about making space for other things. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's how people do shadow work. That's how people do, when they meditate, or let's say if they want to evolve to some extent. For evolvement to happen, you have to make space for something new. It's just like if somebody's looking for love in life, well, let go of what you have to make space for something new so that
Yeah.
you can allow that to come in, right? That's how I look at life. So in my opinion, I look at, we put life into that death. We put life into death. It's just like if you didn't prepare for death, it's kind of like you're in life here and you're just flowing around like a leaf on a windy day, and you're just basically letting life to see what just
Yeah.
comes next. It's kind of
Nobody's
like,
been.
I'm going to finish now. I'm going to finish now
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
want to make this one point. That's why I asked you about the memory part, and you said that we'd be just like animals, right? But there's no animals, just like there's no people. Believe it or not, the way I look at this is I'm giving life to you by having an interaction with you the same way you're giving me life in return. You get what I'm saying? And I'm giving you life based on the energy and the interaction and the words I'm using to express to you. And because even you saying certain things to me is making other things connect in my mind, which leads me to believe that you are giving life to me to some extent as well. By the words you're using, the certain energy you're giving out, the expressions you're giving, it's opening my mind to different questions. That's why I come out and ask different questions. So you're giving me life.
Yeah.
Nothing in my life exists. I'm giving life to the animals, all the cats that I got 15 cats in my garden. I brought those cats in my reality for what reason? Well, that's God knows why. And that's why people say, oh, God knows why things happen to. No, I know why. If you really just ask, you'll know why. And I already know why because I've had a lot of meditation on the feline energy, the constellations, and all that fly stuff, the animal kingdom and whatnot.
Hmm.
But the way I look at death is I'm prepared. Like, did you build an avatar? Did you build another world? Right? And do you have a mental picture of what it is that you're going into when you do transition? If not, then that's how I feel the whole process of reincarnation happens. You just come back and do this again only because the only memory you have is what you have here, and you haven't truly let it go because you haven't made space for something else in the afterlife. This is my opinion. I'm not saying this is how it is, but I'm also noticing this though. This is why I wanted to talk to you about golems and egregores and tulpas and thought forms and whatnot. I mean, we're doing this now, except we're being manipulated by these thought forms, not knowing that we can actually have control. Instead, they control us only because the real us is not awake. What are we aware and conscious to? That's why I said, who is conscious right now? The ego is conscious, but once something else wakes up and then this ego tends to go numb and fall asleep. It's a scary situation because you feel like you're losing yourself. You feel like you're literally dying because
Yeah.
it's not a physical death, but it's a death that you feel. If you're able to just say no, I'm okay with letting it go. It becomes a beautiful process now because you just let go of fear. But if you're holding on to a fear, that's paralyzing, but you're closing the door for expanding into something new. This is why I asked you about the death, the memory, right? The memory of what I got here, why I feel the way I do towards certain things is just the memory. Like my son, I love my son, bro. Like, but if I don't have memory of him tomorrow, how would I feel for him? You know?
Can you pull the
Go ahead, I'll let you
visor
go.
down? You see the sun? That's
Yeah,
it.
I see that
It's
that's
glaring right
that's
in. I can barely see you.
that yeah, that's me, bro. I'm so freaking glowing right now.
Well, it looks like you're enlightened now.
I'm
That,
gonna
that's better.
I'm gonna
That's
move.
perfect.
I'm
With the
just
full
moving my
vibe
car
behind
to
you.
the side of the house.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move the car to the side of my house this way. It doesn't hit me, bro. Yeah, you'll be able to see me now.
Yeah. Yeah.
All I do is
So,
just move. I just move the car.
well, just picking up from what you say about the memory, you see,
Mhm,
from a very early stage in our lives, they want to close us down.
mhm.
The whole indoctrinating system is about closing our aspiring, our aspirations.
Before you move on. So what is that they is closing us down? Who is the they though?
Well, that's a good question in itself. Who are they? It may very well be that it's a facet of the human being which is given the most emphasis at this moment in time. And we're in the Kali Yuga, we're in the denser. So, therefore, the powers that be are money oriented, power oriented. And so, with that in mind, they want to see how best to farm us. And then the whole Austrian educating system, came into being, whereby we all sat in rows looking at the teacher at the head of the room, whereas in Finland, they don't do it like that. They've broken away from that system. They go back
Doesn't
to
that doesn't that sound like the ego of humanity though? Like that, like when you hear the they trying to close us down, doesn't it sound like that's a human's ego trying to get you to realize it yourself because they want to continue to fight to stay in the limelight, or that's why you ever hear people say like the ego struggles to be the center of attention. Like whenever you try to have an ego death, it's like, or even to get out of body, right? Like you have to put the body to sleep in order for you to have any type of spiritual experience. You got to like almost sneak out the door,
gotta
right?
put the
So it's like,
ego to sleep. Yeah, that's right.
so
Sneak
that's
out the
why
back door.
when I and look at it, it's a small amount. The people in power are nothing but a small family, right? And if
Yeah.
you look at the ego compared to the real you is a really small aspect of yourself. That's why I said, as within, so without. That day is literally the mirror reflection of your ego trying to keep you from realizing yourself. Because if you realize yourself, it wouldn't exist in this reality no longer. You get what I'm saying? So tell me if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, okay. So if we don't have an ego, and if the whole education system was different, and from the cradle to the grave, we were introduced to spirit and the notion of all being one, and us being cosmic light beings, and there's no difference between you and I, and everything that we
Mhm.
have, we share because there's no ownership. There are certain tribes in certain continents which don't have the concept of ownership. And there was once a documentary done on an African tribe, which was something similar. They didn't own anything. They're not women or husbands or kids, because the you see, if you look back into ancient times with like tribes people, then lots of these tribes, they weren't monogamous. They were promiscuous, and so they never knew who the kids belonged to, father wise, and so therefore all the kids just became a part of the family, and different women who were lactating would settle on whatever child was there. And so if we had that sort of level, then there'd be a whole different ball game with the human being, and the ego would be vastly diminished. And if they didn't have emphasis that we've got to remember this and remember that, and remembering data all the time, and
All these
remember,
memorials. Yeah, all
yeah,
these memorials.
look what they, like you say, we've got no idea what happened in the past, longer than our, physical
Existence.
life. It could actually be a complete illusion. It could be all fabrication. All the stuff about all the rest of the stuff, the wars and this, that, and the other. Well, I maintain that even today, yeah, I don't believe there's a war going on in Ukraine. I don't believe that there's even Australia. People could say to me, "Well, you've been to Australia." I'll say, I don't know that I've been to Australia. I know I travelled on a plane, for like 24 hours. I know I landed somewhere called Brisbane, and there's lots of these concepts being bounded around. But let's just say that there was a nuclear holocaust and it killed off 99% of the world's population, and everybody forgot about Australia, and then you were there. Well, it's just a stamp in time, isn't it? All these concepts are a stamp in time. They mean nothing. And so when we say that, oh, is there a war in Ukraine? Well, you ask yourself, well, what's Ukraine? What's war? And the concepts, until in the end, there's nothing in actual fact that's existing. If you take all the concepts away from everything, this thing here is a complete fabrication born out of language and concepts. If we don't have language and concepts, what do we have?
Yeah. This is how I look at it. I think we are all the same, but we're all very different at the same time. See, the whole purpose to us even knowing that it is the ego side of ourselves, like all this information I just spoke about, I would ask myself, well, what's the purpose of even knowing this? How would this benefit me in my life? Or why would me even speaking about this benefit anybody else? You know what I'm saying? But it all comes down to, you're not going to, see, you can't kill your ego the same way you can't kill the they that we're talking about, because if not, you would have no existence here. We have to swim in duality for you to even have an experience,
Yeah.
at least the illusion of duality. But we always, what it really is polarities, which is two sides of the same coin. But once you become aware, you do things a little bit differently. That's the whole purpose of it. So for example, this is why I'm big on like capitalism, owning your own business and whatnot, doing things that you actually truly love rather than working for the man, educating yourself and your kids in a different way than you were once indoctrinated into the system by. It's just basically being more sovereign. What contracts to engage in, what contracts not to engage in, make money in a different way than, because a lot of people, what the thing is, a lot of people work for money to pay bills, right? But I believe the true birthright and abundant state of the individual is to do what you love to do, get paid for it, and there's never a lack of resources only because you're doing what you love. There's a lot of people who hate their fucking job. They go to work, but that's how they live. That's how they close themselves off to anything bigger. And that's the whole purpose of it, is you're not going to escape the system. I'm part of the whole fucking, we're going to call it the matrix and shit. It's just that I'm not entertaining the shit that they are proposing to me online. Like if I go and I start researching everything that's happening in the war in Ukraine and Russia and all that, you know what's going to happen? The algorithm is just going to feed me more of it, just to entice me, to get me to look at it. And it's like, I'm not interested in it, so I don't even click it. And it's not to be ignorant about it. I'm aware that it's happening. My attention is not there. So I feel like the more attention people put into those type of topics, the more of a catastrophe might manifest in their life, only because of what they've been paying attention to. And it may not be that the war is going to come to their front door. You know what I'm saying? It's just going to be where other things, where you may have chaos in your family. Family members may go to war with each other, and then you're in the middle of it. And that's how you manifested a scenario, just on the things you've been paying attention to. Only you didn't realize that it's like a mirror, but an indirect mirror of what happens. So let's say I know it's there. I'm aware. I'm just not entertaining it. I'm not paying attention to it. While you're there, living it out, I'm just aware of it from the comfort of my own sofa. And that's basically how I look at it. You're not going to get rid of the the inversion. It's there, but it's how much energy and attention you put into it. That's just how I look at it, as far as like, yeah, we are equal, but we're not equal at the same time. You're totally different than I am, a very totally different person. You think totally different, and we're all different. That's just the bottom line. We're not all the same, but yet we are at the same time. That's how I say we're shards, we're God, we're not God. And we kind of combine the two things.
Yeah, and so when I look at you see, what I've done throughout all my life is, if I've wanted to discern something, how something works, then it's very, very important to go back to the root and source. And so this is why, for me, 99% of the internet is of no value to me anymore, because all they're doing is repeating what somebody else has said. And so
That's
what
right.
I did, as soon as I started to wake up, I headed for the second-hand books shops, and I was looking in dusty, old, dirty books which were like 100 years old or 50 years old or more, and I was attracted to those because I didn't want any modern day influence, because I wanted to go back in time to the mindsets of the initial human being which began to think about these things. And so therefore I ended back in ancient philosophy and religion on all those sort of things. And then when you find yourself in the Buddhist religions or the Hindus scriptures like the Upanishads and all these sort of things, well, you get the source of what the human being is without any of the nonsense, because they weren't infiltrated, they weren't polluted. Everything that these brilliant people laid down in writing and scripts for us, that came out of their cosmic consciousness, and that's what I endeavor to get back into. And so meditation takes us there, psychedelics take us there, and staying away from the internet, because that pollutes our beautiful brains. And so
Yeah.
when we look, what happened to me with this whole awakening thing, I realized how polluted I was. I was completely corrupt. Everything about me was corrupt. And so it took an almighty crash and 7 years of reclusion before I even began to gather my thoughts again, my own thoughts, and start asking valid questions about what on earth is it to be a human being? What is this? What's the sky? What's the world? What's the cosmos? What's consciousness? What's love? What's hate? What? And I spent, and I'm, 14 years, on a crash course doing this. But what I've done during that period, I think, and I would like scholars, biblical scholars, philosophers, or intellectuals to challenge me on what I'm saying. But what I've put in that book is, I'm saying, look, I know what's gone on in these religions. I know what's gone on in the Bible. I can see from the get-go that it's just human psychology. It's just a very, very base level of human psychology to try to encourage the uneducated around us to get along with each other, for God's sakes, because we're animals and we have very violent tendencies. And the only reason most of us are not violent these days is because we're petrified of the consequences. Because otherwise, I'm pretty sure that everybody, would exercise some sort of personal autonomy over somebody else. That's the creature we are. Now, in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, which was perfect and bliss and wonderful, Adam and Eve were ignorant. And then they became knowledgeable when they ate from the fruit of the forbidden fruit, the tree, which the serpent just suggested you might want to eat this fruit that he says you shouldn't eat because he wants to keep you ignorant. But I'm not saying, see, the serpent's not the baddie. Nowhere in Genesis does it say the serpent's the baddie or it's evil. That's later shit that came about, and it's only very vaguely alluded to. What Sir put the nail in the coffin of Lucifer as writers like Dante and Faust and Goethe, all these sort of people. They've created this Satan into this monster, which never was the case in the Bible. And so people, they need to go back and really, really study what the Bible actually said. And all the Bible did was, if you can imagine Adam and Eve in complete bliss. Why are they in bliss? Because they're in ignorance. They didn't even know that they were naked. And so on the premise of that, it's simple. It's just a simple case. This is why the Buddhists just sit under a tree or go into caves, because they want to be absolutely simple, because they know when their minds is like that, that's when they enter into the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is pure bliss, ignorance, and solitude. Hell is knowledge and confusion and wrong and right and left and right and up and down and hot and cold and oh my God, all these things, and wars in Ukraine and terrorists in here, there and everywhere. If you don't ever watch the news, the internet, if you throw your phone away and go and live in the woods, every single thing, just like you say, will disappear, because as far as your consciousness is concerned, nothing will exist anymore. And that's it, you see. You know, the level of control, they want everybody to have one of these gadgets where you're on call 24 hours a day of your life forever. And they want to tell you what you should be paying attention to. Pay attention to this, pay attention to that. Tweet, 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 tweet. For fuck's sake, people, throw that phone away. Emancipate yourselves, become free, because all this stuff is Maya. I will never ever set foot in Ukraine. I wouldn't have even known that there was a country called Ukraine until probably about 10 years ago when I started to study the map. And all these things, it means nothing to me. But when they force stuff down our throats to cause us anxiety and sickness, and to speak about things and give it energy and build it up, we're the ones that are creating that war, because if nobody gave a fuck about it, it would never happen, because it's all about
That's exactly, in my opinion, it's basically, even having an opinion requires your participation, right? So it's basically the way they get you to participate is the moment you observe it, you automatically want to take sides, and that's the power that's getting fed in there, is your opinion. Then this person should, it already exists only because you're polarizing to a position, which is what makes it more empowered now.
It's divide and conquer from the very beginning. Right. Now, Ziggy, where have we seen that before? Where have we seen this division before? We see it in the human brain. When we cut the corpus callosum, we have two independent brains. They think for themselves, and they've got their own ideas about how the world should be. Now, Jordan Peterson and people like Ian McGilchrist, who I've read his book, The Master and His Emissary. He spent 20 years looking into this stuff. He's a psychiatrist, and he started to ponder, why do we have split brains? What other animals have split brains? And what he says was, the vast majority, 99 point something, of all other living creatures have split brains. Why is that? Because we live in a dichotomous, polarized cosmos, and we are all reflections of it. Of course, we've got to think fucking this and that. Otherwise, we couldn't ever get on. And even ants war with each other, and they've got power structures and this and that. It's just the way it is.
This is where I believe this whole thing, even with religion, when they say being born again of the spirit, it's basically, in my opinion, overcoming humanity. Once you can actually see it from the singular point, you can see the oppositions, and you find the opportunities in those, in the oppositions.
You got to overcome being a human being. That's what it's about.
That's right. Right.
But when you overcome being a human being, then you're enlightened, and then there's no reason for you to come back here again, because you don't want to contend with this Maya. Once you realize it's Maya, once you are Dorothy and Toto, and you go to the Emerald City and you pull the curtain back, well, the game's over. And that's kind of like where I am now. The game's over for me. And so I'm just thoroughly enjoying in the mirage that this thing is. It's a beautiful mirage. And what I don't pay attention to doesn't exist. Because I am God. We're all God. We all do exactly what God did. In the beginning, God thought about shit, and then he said it was so. Well, that's what we do. If you think that you're going to get gunned down by the gangsters out in your street, then, if you go down there, then the chances are you probably will, because you're creating that reality. But if you don't go there, and if you don't think it, then, you create another reality. And that's how it is, isn't it? It's our thoughts create our reality. And I know for absolute fact, when I've taken myself away from all of the trappings, and I immerse myself into meditation for 5 hours a day, and I'm reading for the other 10 hours, then I go into a different dimension of consciousness. And I know then where heaven and hell reside. They're just different facets of the human brain. As soon as we get engaged with the left side, which is hell, because it's all the math and the language and the problem solving, if we engage in the right side, which is all the fantasy, all the art and the music and the wonderful things, look where we are. Heaven and hell. That's all the Bible's talking about. And I'm like, for God's sake, somebody please, it's about time somebody fucking said it. Am I going
I'm actually, Yeah, and I'm actually a lot like you. That the whole thing is that whenever I'm speaking, I look for somebody to basically say something in
Yeah,
opposition to what I'm saying. But it's not because I'm looking for a debate or I'm not sure of my information or I'm insecure or anything like that. Because you ever notice that the people who always look in a fight are the really ones that want to, like, they're insecure. They want to fight because they just not sure of themselves or they need to prove themselves. Like they always say, like the Chihuahua is the loudest barker because it's like it's got that Napoleon complex. But the reason I like doing this is there's a lot of ways where I can actually challenge myself, right?
mm,
But it's more or less to sharpen what I already have. But in actuality, the whole debating thing, I'm actually forming an opinion at the end of the day. You know how they also say, "Judge not." What is your opinion on that? Like, judge not, lest ye be judged, and whatnot. As far as like how we are doing it as humans, or let's say even when you come out and say, the Muggles and shit, and a Muggle ass whooping and whatnot. What is your perspective on that, and the way you're judging that, and then the way they say, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." What's your perspective on that?
well, in the book, I actually put down about
That's why I'm asking, by the way, because I know I saw a little section of that.
yeah, about 15 excerpts from the Bible as to where judging came into Jesus' philosophy. And
Mhm.
so I looked at that and I had a revelation in regards my own judgment. Um, and I realized, you see, until we really experience being judged, we have to be the recipient of something to fully understand it. We have to take psychedelics to fully understand them. We have to have abject terror before we're going to experience hell. We have to be in the most wonderful, blissful state before we're going to experience heaven. And so in my life, I've been fortunate enough to experience all these things. Abject terror, abject pain and trauma, and the most wonderful things. And so I look at myself and I go, look, well, it seems to me that I have epitomized the human being because I've gone from one polarity of life to the other and all stuff in between. What has all these books and religions been speaking about? All these books and religions, it doesn't matter what culture they come from, they all pertain to the same thing. It's basic human psychology of realizing that if you do good stuff to people, then the chances are they're going to do good stuff back. And when people do good stuff, and when you do good stuff, you feel good. If you do bad stuff, your chances are people are going to do bad stuff to you, and then you're going to feel bad. It's a no-brainer. It's left brain, right brain stuff, But you've got people, and they're supposed to be super intelligent, biblical scholars, and they're talking about this, that, and the other. Guarantee there hasn't been a single one of them that's had a spiritual experience. And I'd like to say to them, well, I've had first-hand experiences, a lot of them, and I want to tell you what it is as a spiritual person, as a spiritual entity, what this thing is and what that book's about. And all you scholars, you're all like, oh yes, about this and about that, and you're desperately, desperately, desperately looking to make a fucking silk purse out of that pig's ear of a book. It's just a fucking mess of a conglomerate of fucking shit wrote by, myriad people over myriad years, and they're trying to make out it's the word of God. Well, for fuck's sake, he wasn't a very smart God, if that was the case. He wasn't a very loving one. He wasn't a kind one. And, where are the attributes of Jehovah in the Old Testament? The guy's a fucking nightmare. And yet they try desperately to tell you that God loves you. It's just so sickening. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of the dullness of human intelligence. This is why I'm always proclaiming my own genius, because for fuck's sake, I've looked long and hard, Ziggy. I've looked all over the fucking world for 14 years for intelligence. I can't fucking find it. Very, very rarely. And I'm like, how is it that people actually believe that stuff? What is wrong with them? Have they had any spiritual experiences? If they've had spiritual experiences, they don't need the fucking book. If
Hey,
you
Aaron,
know
what do you
God,
think the?
if you know
Oh
God,
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
you don't need faith. All these people, faith, 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 faith. In the Quran, it says every single line, you must believe, 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 believe. It's threatening you that you must believe. If you don't believe, well, the fucking whole thing falls to pieces because it's a crock of shit. And that's the premise of it. You have to believe it. So they've got you. They've trapped you. I've never believed a fucking thing in my life. And, I won't believe it. And I was asking all these Christians in recent times what, their experience of God is. They never had any. And I would tell them that God spoke to me. Angels have come to me. I've been to hell. Jesus has spoke to me. And I'm not even a fucking Christian. What the fuck's going on? And all this faith is for people that just do not know God. If you're a spirited person, you know God. And you know you are God. And that's it, period. Be done with the fucking stupid bullshit already.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people, they're just so dull. And they'll never perceive this. And their minds have been captured. They never thought for themselves. And that just brings about the greatest of frustration to me. And I'm kind of like, I'm not that smart. Honest to goodness, I'm not that smart.
Well, here's my question: why does it excite you so much when you perceiving the world to not get it, not quite get it? I see how passionate you feel toward it, and I see how worked up you get about it.
I'm flabbergasted. I'm flabbergasted that the world has been beguiled in such a way. And this is why, for many years, I've said, I'm not from here. I'm most certainly not from here. And I think lots of people, the spirits are incarnated from other dimensions and cosmoses. And that's why there's such a variance. You see, when we look at, we've all got the same brains, we've all got the same bodies, we're all on the same world, and yet we're all so different. How do you work that one out then? Even when we come from the same parents, Ziggy, we're chalk and fucking cheese. How do you work that one out? It's got nothing to do with genetics. It's got to do with spirit. This is a spiritual dimension. There is no physical matter here. It's all.
How would well, let me actually pause it. I'm gonna read so it doesn't get too long on my end.
Yeah. We'll take 5 minutes, make a cup of tea, and then come back again.
Yeah.
So are you pausing now, or are you going to just finish what you said?
No, I paused it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's better because the thing. Yeah, I'm not recording. Yeah, because the thing is that it gets too long and then I can't upload the shit. Like the other one, I was able to upload because it wasn't that long. But unless you know what it is, I mean, I got my desktop. I could do it on my StreamYard.